history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Wednesday, May 6th, 2015, middle of the weekday, hump day, starting that long, slow glide down to Pow on a Friday. Not that we seem to get much relief from the insanity over these weekends. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room, ready to answer the phone when you come on in. Now, if you are in Kansas, or for that matter, anywhere in the Midwest, you might want to keep an eye out the window. They are under tornado warnings there, and you do need to take that very, very seriously. I remember many years ago, I was working at an animation shop in Omaha, and we went out storm chasing because we thought it was fun, not to mention foolish, and tornadoes are amazing to watch here. We actually had one here on Hawaii just about 2 weeks ago out on the leeward side of Oahu, and didn't cause any damage, of course, not on the scale that you see there in the Midwest. Couple of quick program notes. Tomorrow, Thursday, Gilad Otzman will be on our show to talk about his new book and his current music and book tour. And a week from tomorrow, Michelle Rosen of the Tylenol murder story is going to be back on our program talking about her Kickstarter campaign to fund a documentary film about the Tylenol murders. And it's important to keep looking at this story, not because of the Tylenol murders themselves, but as a reminder that large corporations routinely lie to the public to protect their own interests, which I think is also going on with this Germanwings situation where they're saying, oh, yeah, absolutely, he was practicing how to set the controls for a descent. If this guy's a co-pilot on a commercial airline, he doesn't need to practice that. What they're describing about, changing the knob on the flight director to change the altitude, that's something a student pilot does. Experienced pilot doesn't need to do that. So the story is already falling apart as far as I'm concerned. All right, the big booga-booga today, they got out the Bex howitzer, is that ISIS has announced they have 71 trained soldiers in 15 American states ready to strike at a moment's notice. Have you noticed what an amazing coincidence it is that when the subject of NSA spying on us all comes up for discussion in the Congress, and all of a sudden ISIS is right here, see, you have to let us go on spying on you to protect you. Didn't work in Garland, did it? And by the way, this latest warning about ISIS, like the original claim that ISIS was behind the attempted attack in Garland, Texas, came from Rita Katz's Site Intelligence Group, which means it's just more booga-booga, courtesy of the Mossad and the Central Intelligence Agency. Now then, what's really kind of interesting, almost reassuring, is how even the corporate media has pushed back against against Pamela Geller and her group for even doing this. I mean, nobody is falling for the idea that this is an exercise in freedom of speech. In the same country where courts are basically saying it's okay to ban ads about the Israeli settlements. Everybody understands Pamela Geller went out there to just anger Muslims as much as possible, hoping and praying there would be a response to move her agenda of war on all Muslims forward here. And so I'm looking at this article. We linked to it over. Even NPR is not buying into this stuff, saying that Pamela Geller's group is not pro-free speech. They are decidedly anti-Islamic. They are constantly attacking Islam and Muslims. They have a very poor record for accuracy or truth. Even the Southern Poverty Law Center says, yeah, these are extremists, anti-Muslim extremists here. SPLC is also describing Pamela Geller as the group's executive director. They call her flamboyant. I saw some pictures of her where she was out there talking about how Muslim women dress and how it represents oppression, and to show her opposition to the to Muslim fashion. She was photographed in this bikini that was all decorated like she got it from a bordello in Nevada, and just letting it all hang out there. And I didn't link to those photos from my site because they are a reminder that sometimes modesty makes the better fashion sense. Certainly it's the case in Pamela Geller's situation here. And they go on to basically say that, this is not freedom of speech. They are out there preaching hate against Muslims. All right. Pamela Geller's group was behind the subway ads in New York, where the judge said they had to be run, and the New York Transit Authority simply said, we've adopted as a policy no political ads of any kind whatsoever. Pamela Geller was also leading the charge against plans to build a mosque in Manhattan, which Pamela Geller denounced as the ground zero mosque. What an insult to allow a mosque to be built, near the World Trade Towers. And again, that's if you presume the official story is correct about who was behind 9/11. We ran a poll on that very question yesterday at whatreallyhappened.com. As usual, 99% of the respondents do not believe the official story of 9/11. And we got a handful of votes from the usual monitors who read my website on behalf of various government agencies. All righty, another very critical article from richardsilverstein.com. Pam Geller is our very own Pastor Terry Jones, celebrating in her moment of glory and media attention because of the attack on her, basically, Charlie Hebdo sequel is what she was trying to do. This was supposed to be America's Charlie Hebdo, and Pamela Geller and the FBI did intentionally set up those artists at the contest to be killed so that they could be used as bloody shirts to drive the public into a new unholy crusade of Christians against the Muslims. And luckily, of course, because people in Texas love their guns, the patsies didn't get in there. And we now know, first of all, those patsies were not currently members of any mosque. Doesn't sound like the sort of thing that you would find in fanatical Muslim, terrorists. We know that one of them has been nursed along and encouraged and supported by a paid FBI informant going all the way back to 2007. Even Laura Ingraham thinks Geller went way too far with this. Geller set this thing up to be a target. Pamela Geller wanted the artists in her contest to be killed, some of them, because she wanted dead, bloody bodies to push her crusade. Now then, very interesting story. Over in Germany, 4 people were arrested with explosives and plans to attack Islamic targets, including mosques. Barely reported in the U.S. corporate media. When it was reported, the 4 arrested people were described as extremists because they only use the word terrorist when Muslims are involved. If it's somebody else, that's an extremist. They're not only Muslims can be terrorists in the U.S. corporate media. Let's see, another article, Myths About Terrorism and Islam in Western Europe. And this article makes a very interesting point. The other day we were talking about how police brutality in America does target whites along with blacks. In fact, more often whites than blacks, and various across-the-board group. And the corporate media, because of politics, focuses only on the attacks on black kids. It turns out that studies of actual incidents of terror indicate that Muslims do not hold a monopoly on that. But the corporate media, again for political reasons, makes a big deal about reporting on any acts of terror that can be assigned to Muslims, even if fraudulently, and terror attacks that go in any other direction just don't make the cut for the news, as indicated by that arrest in Germany, which is basically being ignored by the American media. All right, we're coming up on a commercial break. We have to have some commercials. When we come on back, we're going to be talking about the renewed push for war with China. Now, China's on the special high-interest targets list. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here, and we're starting to see the beginnings of the push for war and confrontation with China. Yeah, I mean, look at the mess we're in with Russia already, and the U.S. government is now saying they got to go after China. Now, yesterday we were talking about a story where the Council on Foreign Relations came out and said China has to be wrecked because they dare to have a currency that is becoming stronger than the U.S. dollar. Now, there's a real attitude problem coming out of that, because what they're basically saying is like, if you have a game of baseball and your team is losing, you don't go out and murder the opposing team so that you can claim victory. And yes, that's exactly what the money junkies are saying. Now, today, Bloomberg picked up the call to punish China. Now, Bloomberg doesn't want to talk about the economic aspect of it, because Bloomberg understands that we, the American people, really do not like the idea of seeing our children killed and crippled to make the bankers richer than they already are. So Bloomberg is out there pushing that the U.S. and China are going to go to war over this series of islands in these disputed waters. Okay, on the other side of the planet, it's not even American territory that's in dispute. It's China and Vietnam and a couple of other countries saying these are our waters and our islands. The U.S. doesn't actually have standing in the debate, but the U.S. needs that war with China to block the rise of the yuan and the renminbi, and they're willing to risk incinerating the surface of planet Earth over this argument over just whose brand of ink and paper everybody's supposed to use for the next 100 years. Which, I don't know, being a person who doesn't have a lot of that ink and paper stuff, it strikes me as a really stupid reason to have a war, risking nuclear war. Now, apparently there is a new book out that's being published in France that reveals French President Hollande has admitted arming the Syrian rebels in breach of the embargo back in 2012. Now, the embargo was canceled in 2013, but Hollande was running guns to those hired mercenaries in Syria that were there to try and get that gosh darn Bashar al-Assad out of there and get somebody in there who will be obedient to Western financial interests. Over in Yemen, the Saudis are fighting in Yemen alongside al-Qaeda against the revolution. We need a scorecard to find out who's really fighting who. And basically, the corporate media is trying to keep the issue very confused by breaking it into little tiny bits like there's the Houthis and there's the military still supporting Salah and everything. And it really is a very simple situation. This is another country where the U.S. intervened, in this case back in 2012, kicked out the legitimate government, put in puppet rulers, and the people of that country do not want to live under puppet rule. They're trying to kick their puppet rulers out. And so the U.S. is having to go back into Yemen. They're using Saudi Arabia as a proxy to try and obscure that from the American people. But we've already seen where the United States has had to go back into Iraq for a third time under the guise of fighting ISIS, had to go back into Libya a second time, again under the guise of fighting ISIS, and now they're having to go back into Yemen because those gosh darn conquered provinces won't stay conquered. What's wrong with these people that they don't understand? Once we overthrow their government, they're supposed to obey their new puppet ruler? Those are the rules we just made up. Don't you understand that? And all this bloodshed is going on here. And this is why Saudi Arabia and U.S. are basically targeting civilians. Because from their point of view, it is the entire people of Yemen who are the enemy for refusing to accept a U.S. puppet ruler. Now, up in Russia, a senior aide to Russian President Putin has accused Israel's Mossad of training ISIS, operating inside Iraq and Syria. Now, we've been having all these leaks about how ISIS is actually funded by CIA, and now we're getting this report. And what ISIS is the new manufactured boogeyman. They had to replace al-Qaeda because too many people found out that al-Qaeda in Arabic slang means a toilet. And too many of the al-Qaeda were exposed as fakes, like Adam Gaddan and Yusuf al-Khattab, who turned out to be Adam Perlman and Joseph Cohen, respectively. They were fakes, phonies, frauds. So, all right, we'll let al-Qaeda go. We'll come up with a new manufactured enemy. This is ISIS. And they're out there with their video production crew, making a bunch of videos of beheadings and other atrocities. And from then on, anytime anybody's opposing U.S. policy, just call them ISIS and send in the bombers. And that's what's going on. But we're beginning to understand. I mean, there were all these witnesses in Syria and Iraq who saw American military transports delivering supplies and weapons to ISIS, even as you are being told that ISIS is the enemy. Now, Iraq's Interior Ministry, part of the U.S. installed puppet government, is denying reports that ISIS is now in control of the majority of the Baija oil refinery, which is Iraq's largest. Despite that denial, Iraq is dispatching new reinforcements to the area to keep ISIS from routing the few troops that still remain there, because Iraq needs that refinery to fund their military efforts. Now, Press TV did an interview with Gilad Atzmon as part of his tour around Europe, basically saying that British politics, just like American politics, are dominated by Israel lobbyists. We have another article that came from Gilad that's linked to the front page of whatreallyhappened.com that names of the Israel firsters in the British government, just like we have here in the United States. Oh, I thought we had a caller, but just went away. Now then, Netanyahu was in a bit of a bind following the resignation of Avigdor Lieberman, basically saying he would not join Netanyahu's coalition government. And Netanyahu was up against a serious deadline to form a new coalition government, and he got in under the wire, but only by conceding power to the Bennett's party. And they've appointed Ayelet Shaked from the far-right party, the Jewish Home Party, is now the new justice minister as part of that deal to keep Netanyahu in power. The problem with that is that Shaked is the member of the Knesset who's out there saying we should just kill all the Palestinians, get it over and done with. So unfortunately, the new government of Israel is not about to be any more gentle with the Palestinians than any previous government as well. All right, we're going to try and fit in a phone call here. Sally in New York, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, hi, Mike. Thanks for having me on. I'm calling because on Monday, May 11th, people are going to their local city halls. They're wearing red shirts because we reject vaccine tyranny in this country and around the world, and we're making a stand.
Good for you. Is there a website people can get more information?
Sure. It's billion with a B, billion toddler march for survival.blogspot.com.
All right. I'm going to put a link to that from What Really Happened. And was that a .net or a .org?
It's .blogspot.com.
Okay. Spot.com.
And I'll be in New York City at City Hall at 1 p.m. Please wear a red shirt and join me.
All right. Send pictures. We got to let you go and take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call, and we'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I want to step back a little bit to this latest report about the German Wings accident, where they're still trying to sell the idea that the co-pilot just decided for the fun of it he was going to kill himself and take a bunch of people with him. Now, again, looking at this from the context of the Tylenol murders, which makes it obvious corporations, the media, and the government will lie to us all to protect business interests. Now, we know that there has been reported a problem with the software in that particular model of Airbus that will put the aircraft into a descent which the pilots cannot override. Now, the report is that this co-pilot was fiddling with the altitude adjustments, that he was rehearsing his descent and dive, something that no experienced pilot needs to bother doing. But if this plane was hit by that software bug, and all of a sudden the plane is flying at altitudes it has not been directed to, what's the first thing the pilot's going to do? He's going to start fiddling with those altitude settings. It's like if you're listening to the car radio and all of a sudden the signal goes away. What's the first thing you do? You grab that tuning knob or the buttons. Try and find out what's going on. That makes a lot more sense to me than this idea that this co-pilot was rehearsing his suicide. All righty, let's see. Now, over in France, this is getting more and more bizarre. There's been this ongoing controversy regarding these Mistral helicopter carriers that Russia hired French companies to build, and the French companies built them. Russia was ready to take delivery, even had their crews on the ground in France ready to board and take them back to Russia. When the United States came on into France and said, don't you sell those to Russia, Russia is the bad people. Russia's a little upset. They want their money back. France doesn't know what to do with these Mistral ships. Apparently, for some reason, they're not able to sell them to anybody else. France is now saying that they may just take these Mistral ships out and scuttle them in the ocean, just even though these are brand new ships. They're just going to take them out and sink them. Huge, huge waste. And of course it is not exactly conducive to warm and friendly relations between Russia and France. And because of this, French military companies are now losing business around the world because nobody wants to contract with France's defense industry for weapons, knowing that the U.S. might come in and say, we don't like those people this week. Don't deliver. India just basically cut back a huge sale for French warplanes, and now they're going to do business with Russia. Now, here's a very bizarre article, and it'll tell you just how absurd the propaganda is getting. And the headline of the article is, NATO's largest ever sub-war games add to tensions with Europe. And basically saying that NATO is constantly going on about worsening tensions with Russia mean that we've got to arm ourselves. And they're announcing the largest ever submarine war games just off the Russian waters here. And so NATO's actions are what is causing the tension. And then NATO turns around and says, those Russians, tensions with them are getting worse. We need to spend more on weapons. No, actually, when you start playing with weapons of war near the border of a country, obviously tensions with that country are going to go up. Now, inside Ukraine, they're having a huge problem conscripting more people to go make war on their fellow Ukrainians. And the latest estimates are right now that 95% of military-age men are finding ways to evade military service. Massive bribery of the draft board to keep certain people out. Others are simply leaving Ukraine to go to other countries. These are the young people, the trained people, the productive people leaving Ukraine. Ukraine's going to be a hollow shell economically and intellectually, but before this is all over. All righty, let's see. Now then, over in the U.S. Senate, Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell has cut off debate on the Iran sanctions bill in order to prevent the addition of some of these amendments by Senators Rubio and Cotton that are clearly intended to just kill the deal outright. But McConnell cut off the debate to prevent the addition of these amendments because these amendments aren't going to be supported by all the members of the Senate. And McConnell right now is counting on the fact that they have a veto-proof majority to push this bill through. Now, first of all, isn't it weird over the last, almost 2 decades, Congress could care less about starting wars. They'll pre-authorize this, pre-authorize that. Sure, President, go bomb, kill, we don't care. We're too busy. But when the White House talks about making peace and avoiding war, Congress just gets up there and says, we have to have our say in there. Which, by the way, they don't. Congress can declare war. Congress can't call one off in the Constitution. And remember, members of Congress are not supposed to directly interfere with U.S. foreign policy. That is exclusively the jurisdiction of the White House and the State Department. Every member of Congress who's voting on this bill, in favor of this bill, they're in violation of the Logan Act, which carries a 3-year prison sentence. And these members of Congress are willing to flout the laws of the land, flout the Constitution, in service to their true masters over there in Tel Aviv. And while there's going to be a great deal of grandstanding on this, the reality is the United States Congress does not have any legal jurisdiction over the United Nations Security Council, which is the P5 in the P5+1. At the very most, Congress can force Obama to duck out of the agreement, at which point the other nations will just move forward with their own agreement. Call it the P5-1. To end the sanctions so they can all go back to doing business. And that will leave the United States, the economically isolated country. And possibly as proof of that, India is signing a new port deal with Iran, despite the U.S. coming in and wagging its finger and saying, don't you do that. You don't do that. You don't make friends with the people that we don't like. And India is developing new trade ties with Central Asia. And basically is telling the United States, you don't come in here and tell us who we're going to do business with. You know, your economy is crashing. You can't buy our exported products. You don't make anything we want to buy. You're not part of the economic reality of the present-day world. Now, meanwhile, despite all the economic hardship here in the United States for we the people, boy, is the money flowing all over the war zones. We were talking the other day about how some $1.5 billion that was just handed to U.S. military officers in Afghanistan as discretionary spending has just vanished without a trace. Nobody knows where it went. But we can guess. To date, the United States has spent a total of $4 trillion, with a T, in Afghanistan and Iraq. That amount of money could have bought $100,000 condos for 40 million Americans, or given 200 million Americans a down payment with which to buy a home. But that money is now all gone. It's vanished. It's basically all that's left of it are these smoldering craters on the ground in Afghanistan and Iraq. There's another article on the same issue. This is at 21st Century Wire. The fraud of war. U.S. military's black market fuel racket. U.S. military is literally stealing the fuel bought with your tax dollars and reselling it for their own profit on the black market in Afghanistan. It's totally corrupted. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. We're talking about the black hole that war is for your money. And many, many years ago, when I was still involved with the Robert Abel & Associates company in Hollywood, they started to branch out from doing film and TV and solicited some military contracts. And we landed one to help design a dashboard for the Star Wars program as part of a proposal by one of the contractors. And I'd already been through security stuff classification when I was with NASA, but some of the other people working at Abel's just weren't prepared for that kind of a society, as it were. But just the amazing difference in money. I mean, for ordinary Americans, money is something that you put out with an eyedropper. If you're lucky, maybe a garden hose. And all these military spenders, they've got fire hoses. It's an incredible volume of money. And it's just vanishing into these war zones and into somebody's pocket, obviously, here. And the U.S. government is trying to sort of make it look like they're trying to get the situation under control. So we're looking at this story out of publicintegrity.org, where U.S. military personnel have been convicted of roughly $50 million worth of crimes in Iraq and Afghanistan, including theft, contract rigging, bribery, and so forth. Now, 50 million out of over $1 billion that has gone missing without a trace tells you how few of these people they're actually catching. Yeah, just somebody who's politically unconnected that they're going to offer up as a scapegoat to say, see, we're trying to be careful with your money in the war zones, but very clearly they are not. Getting into the economy here, over in Switzerland, they had a moment of panic earlier today. Today's the 5th anniversary of the so-called flash crash, and the Swiss stock market took a major plunge midday. They had to actually halt the entire Swiss stock market for 3 minutes, and that was followed by an outage in the stocks STOXX exchange data delivery. Now, maybe the system was overwhelmed, or somebody is practicing a cyber attack on the financial system to be blamed on ISIS, because remember, governments, by their very nature, will not accept responsibility for their mistakes. And we know that the U.S. government and the U.S. money junkies are desperate to find a scapegoat. Russia, China, whoever. And we have speculated before about the possibility of a virtual 9/11 in which the NSA, Mossad, whatever, intentionally crashed the U.S. financial system computers. And the U.S. comes out and says, well, we don't know who owns what anymore. We'll just have to nationalize everything. Gosh darn those Iranian, Chinese, Russian hackers who did this to us. And the collapse of the U.S. economy is transformed from being the end result of decades of corruption and stupidity in Wall Street and Washington, D.C., and it becomes an act of war. Those dastardly foreign hackers, we were just on the verge of turning the economy around, and they came in and struck us when we were weak. And it's not beyond the realm of possibility. Because nobody on Wall Street, nobody in Washington, D.C., are going to stand up there and say, yeah, we really kind of messed this up, guys. We're sorry. I'll resign. You can have your money back. They're not going to do that. They're going to find somebody to blame so they can run off with their money and say, ha, those stupid Americans, we got them again. By the way, there was an article we linked to whatreallyhappened.com noting that all of a sudden there has been a dramatic increase in the number of top-level corporate executives who are deciding to take early retirement, cash out their stock, and very quietly go someplace else. So forth and so on. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Peter in California, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. I'm on my car phone. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, great. Mike, I wanted to call, as you were talking earlier, about how we make nothing, how our economy is all about war, and we make nothing and we buy nothing. We can buy nothing now because we have no disposable income. But I want to make a point here. I've got an interesting perspective on this because I was a lieutenant colonel in the Army and went over to Iraq at Desert Storm and also as a contractor in 2007, 2000 to 2009. But one of the things that I know you and I absolutely agree on is that our economy is about nothing but war, clearly, and has been since the end of World War II. But back in the early 90s, when Cheney was the Secretary of Defense, the United States started to outsource all of our everything that we could to private companies. They did it for, of course, political contributions and so on. Mm-hmm. But let me give you a for instance. When I was active duty back in I'm your age, Mike, back in the 70s and 80s and so on, up until the 90s, you could a truck driver who drove. The Army had scads of trucks and truck battalions and so on. And the guys driving the trucks were E2s and E3s, and they were making about $500 a month. And when I went over with KBR as a contractor, all that was taken over by civilian contractors. KBR had the contract. And instead of paying that guy $500, we paid that same guy, who is now a civilian, we paid him about $140,000 a year. And back in the old days, when that guy, when that E3, private first class, whatever, didn't, refuse to go through gunfire to deliver, his supplies to the spearheads or whatever, you could take the guy out literally and shoot him under the Uniform Code of Military Justice for cowardice and face the enemy. However, with KBR, when we took about 700 casualties, by the way, as truck drivers, the truck drivers could just flat out quit. Mm-hmm. Not only was it way more expensive, they could just quit, and all at once, there's nobody to drive those trucks.
Well, that's why they've developed these trucks that drive themselves. They had one of them they demonstrated on Top Gear, which was actually very, very impressive, I might add. So, that may be a mood issue, but you're absolutely right. When war gets privatized, it's big bucks. It's always about business. However, I will disagree with you that the primary focus of the U.S. economy is war. War is a big moneymaker, but the business model for the United States, starting at the end of World War II, was the United States was going to become the financer of the rest of the world, because the rest of the world had to use the dollar for cross-border commerce, so they were all going to come to the U.S. and borrow those banknotes at interest, or they were going to bring us their manufactured goods and produce for those banknotes so that they could go out and do business. The war machine was maintained to coerce compliance with that new model of the global economy. And as the model for a global economy, Bretton Woods petrodollar breaks down. That's why the war machine is being cranked up to reconquer the rest of the planet and drag them back to the petrodollar, drag them back to Bretton Woods. That is the primary reason for all these wars.
Well, I didn't make myself clear, Mike. I absolutely agree with what you just said completely. And the only thing that we have now, since we don't, as you say, make anything, we don't have any disposable income as a economy-wide, is the only thing we bring to the table is of elements of national power is military force. That's all we can do is coerce and bully. We can't do anything else. And when you point out correctly that we make war and other people, make deals like the Russians and the Chinese, it's because we got nothing to make deals with. We make war because that is our deal. Our deal is you do what we say, or you're screwed, and we're going to screw you.
Yeah, that's basically it. The U.S. government is acting just like the mafia, collecting a piece of the action of all the world's commerce and threatening to rub you out if you don't do what we tell you. Bad things going to happen to you. It really is. The U.S. government is behaving just like La Cosa Nostra.
Absolutely. That's all we have going for us. And we're the strong arm for the bankers. Now, that military power, of course, is crucial to the bankers that they don't lose their butts and go to jail because they can keep imposing this unfair, horrible central banking system that they've imposed on.
All right. Well, listen, Peter, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to have to take a break for our top-of-the-hour news right now, so we're going to let you go. I know we have another caller waiting on the line, but you're going to have to wait until after we come back from our news broadcast. Hello, hi, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, and we're going to go take a phone call. Mo in Florida, thank you for being patient. What's on your mind today?
Thank you, Michael. You're worth waiting for.
So what's on your mind today?
I appreciate the opportunity you give me to express myself, but you're talking about billions and, here and there. This $2.3 billion that Rumsfeld talked about a day before 9/11.
That was trillion with a T.
A trillion. I can't even say trillion.
And a trillion here, a trillion there. Soon you're talking some real money.
Yeah, I know this. It's $8,000 for every man, woman, and child in the United States. Mm-hmm. I know that it wasn't mentioned. I know that wasn't the first time. I know they kind of talked about it in 2000. But, and I know where the whatever it is hit, the accounting offices. But how do you have $2.3 trillion? And first of all, I got two questions. Your name of your show is What Really Happened. I got two questions. First of all, why do you think he made that announcement before 9/11? And what do you think really happened to that money? And have you heard anything? And I'll hang up and listen to your response. Thank you so much.
Well, where the money went, there were two prevailing theories. One is that it was somehow siphoned off into a black project that Congress wasn't supposed to know about. And the other is simply that the entire military-industrial complex is so corrupt that everybody involved is helping themselves to the money and putting it in their pocket, like we saw with these stories coming out of Afghanistan. Rumsfeld had to acknowledge it. And by the way, it wasn't the first time they had made an announcement about all these missing trillions, because there had been an earlier scandal where the Government Accountability Office was looking at the numbers coming out of the Pentagon and saying the discrepancies are simply too large to be ignored. We're talking vast sums of money that you cannot account for. And Congress was getting ready to make a stink about this. So Rumsfeld came out and basically said, yes, we acknowledge the money is missing. Should have been the financial scandal, military scandal of the year, but of course 24 hours later, 9/11 happened. The plane that hit the Pentagon flew around the Pentagon and came in and hit the offices of the accountants who were trying to find where that money had gone. And with all the records destroyed, whoever got that money basically got to keep it. And we are living in an age of just absolute, unparalleled corruption of the entire U.S. government, military-industrial complex, security-industrial complex, medical-industrial complex. It is all corrupt. They are all lying. This is how they have grown up. This is how they think the world is supposed to operate. Now, earlier today, Reuters ran a story that Greece had somehow succeeded in making that huge 200 million euro payment that was due today. And the story came and went, nobody picked up on it. Now, we know that had it been announced that Greece failed to make the payment, there would have been repercussions, including credit default swaps, problems for the Bank of France, problems for the Bank of Germany. And given how downplayed this Reuters report is, I have a sneaking suspicion that in point of fact, Greece did not succeed in making the payment, but nobody wants to admit it. Meanwhile, Greece is now floating what they're calling a surcharge on withdrawals from the bank. In other words, they're going to tax you to take your own money out of the bank. So might as well get it all out of there now, pay the tax once, don't put it back in. Which, by the way, is another reason they're talking about cashless society. They want to ban cash, and everything that you have is in the bank's computers, and you get a little plastic card, because that plastic card just moves the money from one bank's computers to another's bank computer. The money's never in your hand, and that obviously makes it impossible for there to be a run on the bank. So that's a big reason for all this talk about a cashless society. Now, the European Central Bank, despite the Reuters report claiming Greece had succeeded in making the payment, the European Central Bank is talking about it's time to cut that liquidity lifeline to Greece. Basically just cut them off. The credit line is going to be shut down. The two stories don't line up. Somebody somewhere is fibbing a little bit. And just like Johnson & Johnson lied to protect their business during the Tylenol murders, just like I think Airbus is lying about suicidal pilots, so that the traveling public doesn't find out about that known software bug. I think the financial system is lying about Greece making that payment to prevent a firestorm of derivatives and other problems from happening. But somewhere there is a huge cash shortfall. They're not going to be able to hide that forever. Story out of the English version of Pravda. Poverty returns to Europe by leaps and bounds. And it's basically saying, ever since the European Union was formed and sold into the slavery of the European Central Bank, the standard of living for all the people of all the member nations of Europe has been in decline, driven down lower and lower and lower and lower to keep the money junkies happy. And what the ECB has been doing is using their authority to shift debt from countries where it is greater to countries where it is lesser, to sort of keep the debt under control below the default zone. But the problem is, sooner or later, and I think we're there already, every nation in the European Union, the debt has reached the point of starting to cross into the default zone. They don't have any more debt to move in there. May have been one of the reasons they were desperate to drag Ukraine in, to have another source of wealth with which to play their banker games. That didn't work out very well here. Here in the United States of America, the ADP jobs report was not very good. Employment number was much weaker than what the market had expected, and it drags the dollar lower, which is not entirely a bad thing because it makes it easier for American companies to sell exported products if we actually had American companies selling exportable products, of which we have very, very few indeed. Remember yesterday we were talking about how the trade imbalance, the difference between the cost of imported products to the United States and the value of exported products from the United States is running $500 billion a year. Now, Wells Fargo has come under allegations of yet more banker fraud against ordinary consumers, and there have been a number of small business owners to come forward to say that they were telephoned by Wells Fargo and encouraged to open additional accounts for their business for some obscure purpose. The business owner said, no, thank you, we're fine with the system that we have now. Then a couple of months later, they opened their bank statement, and the bank statement is showing these new accounts have been created without their permission, for which they are being charged fees for these empty, non-used accounts. They're being charged for this, and so now there's a new big stink. And basically we're at a stage right now where the financial system has become dependent on fraud. A couple of years ago, there was a magazine that did a survey of people on Wall Street, and 25% of them admitted using fraud to conduct their business, and a couple of them came out and said, if we were not committing fraud, we would have gone out of business a long time ago. And it looks like the problem has indeed spread. Latest survey from Activist Post, retirement is now a myth for the ordinary American. You're not going to be able to retire. Social Security is depleted. Pension funds are defunded. The new domestic labor policy is work them until they drop. And this is the world that you are going to leave to the next generation. It's not a pleasant prospect at all. All right, we got to take another break for commercials. We have a caller waiting on the line. We're going to get to you just as soon as we come back from these words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm looking at Fox News real quick, and apparently ISIS threatens to slaughter Pamela Geller. Okay, so they're not all bad, all right? We're going to go to the phones here. Dave in New York. Aloha, Dave. Welcome to the show. What is on your mind?
That was pretty funny, Mike, about Geller there. You were talking last night about the carbon tax and carbon credits and their lies about carbon dioxide being a toxic chemical and blah, blah, blah. Well, I just wanted to say that people who are into, like, high-end aquariums where they grow the aquatic flora and et cetera, if you want a really good aquatic flora in your aquarium, any pet shop owner, any aquarium shop owner will tell you you need a CO2 injector, because just as there's not enough surface area of the water to absorb enough oxygen, and you have to have bubblers and all that kind of stuff, it's not enough surface area to absorb enough carbon dioxide to keep the plants healthy. So you have to get a separate canister of CO2 and employ what you call a CO2 injector for your fish tank where you keep your aquatic plants. You cannot grow a good aquatic garden unless you have that CO2 injector. And every, major aquarium out there, that you can go to with your family, etc., they have those CO2 injectors in there to keep their expensive aquatic plants alive. So I just wanted to throw that in there because you were talking about it last night. I didn't have time to call, but it's a perfect example where you cannot have a decent, a high-end aquarium with nice aquatic plants in it unless you inject that water with CO2.
Well, as we pointed out, commercial greenhouses also artificially increase the amount of CO2 inside their greenhouses because that makes the plants grow faster, taller, produce more saleable crop. And, that's just the reality. But they picked CO2 to demonize as the villain that was going to destroy the world because they could lay that at the feet of human activity in order to justify taxation and control. But it is a gigantic, gigantic hoax here. And by the way, we're already hearing from Australia's northern territories that they are seeing record cold temperatures, all-time record cold temperatures for the territories as they head into their winter.
Well, I just wanted to throw that in there. I mean, a lot of people might not own greenhouses, but there's sure a whole lot of people who own aquariums and keep aquatic plants that there's no way that they could possibly believe that,
Okay, well, listen, thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to let you go here because I need to get back to the news that we're talking about. Now, up in Canada, Alberta's election 2015 is over. And the NDP won a majority government. This is being reported as a major shock that is turning Canadian politics on its head because NDP is the new up-and-comers and nobody was expecting them to accomplish much of anything, and they won a major, major victory. And I think as we look at the elections around the world going into the American election of 2016, we're going to see a decided anti-incumbent fever. Except here in the United States of America, where the elections are so crooked, they have to screw those ballots into the ballot boxes. Speaking of crooked elections, Hillary is out there And as hard as she is dodging questions about the email server and the foundation and the rest of it, she is on the warpath for citizenship for all illegals. If Hillary gets her way, there will be no such thing as an illegal immigrant in the United States of America. If they come across the border, they're legal and they will be allowed to vote. And they're out there saying, yes, she's courting the Hispanic vote with this stunt. She's willing to basically tear down the borders of this country, cause immense economic and health damage to our country because of her desire for that Oval Office. She's got to prove that she's every bit as good as her husband was, that she was the power behind the throne, which nobody's disputing. She was the power behind Bill Clinton's political career. Now then, story over at the Daily Mail in Great Britain. It's funny how we have to find this stuff over in the British press here. Last February, Michelle Obama and her daughters, for the President's Day weekend, headed out of town to Aspen for a ski trip. Ski? But the global warmers say there's no more snow. What were they skiing on? But apparently they used a Air Force jet, $60 million aircraft, and the total cost of the taxpayers just for the flight out and back was $57,000, and did not include transportation, hotels, and pay for the security detail, and of course the accommodations for Michelle and the daughters, ski lift tickets, and all the rest of that. It's good to be the First Lady, I guess. Now then. We are getting reports from the Boone Dam. This is part of the Tennessee Valley Authority. And there's been a growing problem with the Boone Dam. They've already had to lower the water because of concern about seepage around and, more worryingly, underneath the dam itself. And there's now a large sinkhole that is opening up. And there's a great deal of concern that this dam is structurally deficient, as so many in the United States currently are, because they've been neglected. They have not been maintained, because we've got to give all the tax money to Israel and Wall Street and the weapons of war. And they're very concerned because downstream from the Boone Dam are numerous nuclear power plants that could be flooded in the event the dam were to collapse completely. And unfortunately, they can't empty the water behind the dam out completely without wrecking the economy of the region. So they're in kind of an awkward situation. We're going to grab one more phone call. Adam in Canada, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Yeah, you just mentioned the NDP winning the election in Alberta there. The reason that that's such a big shock is because the New Democratic Party is pretty much the more socialist party here in Canada, whereas Alberta is considered like the Texas of the North, right? They've always been very conservative. They're big oil patch ranchers, hunting, Christian, very Christian. So the fact that the New Democrat Party, the most socialist party in Canada, took power in Alberta was just, it's mind-boggling, really.
Well, I think what's going on is the Canadian people, like the American people, would love to live in a true capitalist economy, but we don't. And a lot of people are going into these elections knowing they need to make a choice whether they want to live under socialism or fascism. And very obviously for the ordinary people, socialism, for all its fault, is a better deal for the people than fascism is. And I think that is a big part of why the NDP succeeded. Okay?
Could be.
All right, we got to let you go and take a break for commercials. Thank you for the phone call. We'll be back after these few words from our sponsors. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, and we want to talk about some of the nuclear issues around the world. We're already concerned, obviously, about these nuclear power plants that are downstream from the Boone Dam, where if that were to let go, these nuclear power plants would be flooded, which is not a good thing, because these nuclear plants, like so many others, are storing spent fuel rods on their grounds, because nobody's ever worked out this idea of where we're going to put all of this very dangerous stuff. WIP isn't working out, Hanford isn't working out, and it really is ugly. Now, over in Ukraine, as you're aware, they had some forest fires in the area around the remains of the Chernobyl nuclear power station. And Kiev's official pronouncement was the forest fires were out. They did not actually reach the Chernobyl power station, therefore all is well. Unfortunately, like so many other things that have come out of Poroshenko's administration, it was a little less than accurate because the forest fire burned up the area around Chernobyl where the original radioactive plume had fallen, and it had never been cleaned up. And this radioactive material was incorporated into the plant life through a process called bioaccumulation. In fact, as part of radioactive cleanup, they'll plant ground cover, knowing the plants will suck up the radioisotopes, then they simply take the plants and they destroy them, bury them. And as a result of this forest fire, a large amount of the original radioactive release from Chernobyl has now been pumped right back into the atmosphere. And people with radiation meters all over the area are saying, yes, it's Chernobyl, the sequel. Meanwhile, over in WIP, there's alarming stories that the radioactive release from WIP during the what is being called the thermal runaway, which vaguely sounds like spontaneous fission, may have been much worse than previously announced. 307 billion becquerel of plutonium equivalent may have escaped. Now, 370 billion is a lot, even for a becquerel, which is actually a very tiny measure of radioactivity. If you're talking 1,000 becquerels, it sounds impressive, it isn't. But 370 billion, yeah. And they're saying that more of those drums may have been breached than were admitted to. TEPCO is admitting that the Fukushima facility is leaking again. It's over 600 times their safe radiation levels. Boy, they have really messed this up. And I've said this before, and at the risk of sounding like a nutcase, I'm going to say it again. I am convinced that nuclear technology can be handled safely and be a benefit to mankind, but only if the safety decisions are taken away from the money junkies that own these companies. And again, I point to the Japanese power station at Onagawa, where their design engineer, when that was being built, the design engineer literally put his foot down and said, we are going to design this thing to survive a worst case. We're going to have a tsunami wall that matches the height of the largest known tsunami in the region. We're going to put the generators up on stilts. We're going to make sure this thing will survive. And during that quake and tsunami, the Onagawa station was the only one that escaped damage. It can be made to work. But anytime you get a money junkie in there trying to maximize profitability and keep the stockholders happy, they cut corners. I mean, look at what happened down at San Onofre in California. The owners of San Onofre decided they were going to enlarge the heat exchangers to get more heat out of the reactor to generate more electricity to maximize their profits. They told the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the Department of Energy, that it was just maintenance. They didn't even tell them we're redesigning and rebuilding these things and they need to be inspected. And somewhere along the way, somebody changed the specification for those tubes that carry the primary coolant from the reactor to transfer its heat to water for steam generation. And the metal that was finally specified for the as-builts on that heat exchanger was very susceptible to neutron damage, which is why those things started leaking, and now they've just had to shut down and write off the entire power station. All of these technologies, dams, nuclear power, refineries, whatever, they can be made to work, but you've got to have the political will to say, this is going to be made safe. And you're not going to get that political will from the owners and financiers and the money junkies. That political will is supposed to come from the central federal government. But we know our federal government has gone totally over to the side of the money junkies, which is why you had the Minerals Management Service turning a complete blind eye to the safety violations on the Deepwater Horizon platform in the Gulf of Mexico. The manual blowout preventer on the Deepwater Horizon was 4 years overdue for mandatory maintenance, which is why it failed when needed. And Obama fixed the problem by going on down to the Gulf of Mexico and swimming with his daughter in water that was really, really close to the Gulf of Mexico for the photo op to reassure you all that there's no damage and you can eat the Gulf's seafood, which anybody living on the Gulf of Mexico knows that's absolutely a joke. Now, a while back, there was a guy named Alexander Litvinenko who died of polonium poisoning, and it was blamed on Putin because Litvinenko was a Putin critic, and this went out on all the corporate media. But looking back on it, there are problems with that story because polonium is a very expensive material. It's very rare. It's easily traceable, and merely bringing it into Britain would be an act of war. Why not just get somebody to run him down with a car? And so there's a new theory being put out there that what was going on is Litvinenko was smuggling the polonium into Britain to put in a false flag dirty bomb to be set off and blamed on whoever needed to be invaded back then. All right, so let's get on to the Stinky Badges story. Over in Wycliffe, New Jersey, we reported on this earlier, where this police officer fatally shot another dog, and it turned out he was at the wrong address. And the police department said, follows policy, it was okay, this guy is all right, and now there are protests in the streets of Wycliffe, New Jersey, because this officer basically went into the wrong home when the dog came out, shot and killed the dog. Now, if you're a dog owner, you understand how families emotionally bond with the dog. It is another member of the family. Just because it's got fur and 4 legs, you're emotionally bonded. And having your dog killed by the police, that is traumatic. Especially when you and the dog did not actually do anything wrong, justifying the police being there in the first place. And by the way, over in Baltimore, the defenders of the police are still out there screaming that the police acted correctly. They're trying to claim that a spring-assisted blade is exactly the same thing as a switchblade, which it is not. Now the police union is demanding the mayor of Baltimore and the police chief resign for this rush to judgment and yielding to the mob for prosecution of the officers. All righty, we're going to grab a real quick phone call here. Scott in Texas, what's on your mind?
Hey, Mike, how you doing today? The first time I ever heard your show, I have to admit, I thought you were just crazy as a loon.
Okay.
And then I started listening to you more and more. I was like, man, this guy's right. So I have to give you a lot of credit.
The two are not mutually exclusive. You know, anyway, listen, Scott, we have to take a 4-minute break for commercials. Do not go away, and when we come back from commercials, I'm going to pick up your phone call again. So we got to take a break for commercials, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Coming up on the top of the hour, the phone lines are loading up here, so let's start by going back to Scott in Texas. Scott, you had something you wanted to add to the discussion.
Yeah, hey, I live here in Garland, Texas, and that actual Curtis Colwell Center is probably less than 5 miles from my house. So, you know, you're talking to somebody that is like, okay, I've actually been there to that first Muslim rally, and I posted a little video, and I got my own YouTube channel, Snafu Radio, and so I've, you know, checked it out, and, you know, there's some crazy people out there on both sides of the fence for sure. But, you know, the main thing is there's a guy that's just down the street that, you know, works at a tire shop. He's from Kurdistan. Mm-hmm. And he says, man, we love Christians. You know, I got Christian friends. You know, I don't know what all this is about, you know. Because I would drill him on ISIS, and I would pound him with so much, because I'm pretty wide awake. And so I was telling him about all the information about how dirty our government is, starting all these wars, and doing all this stuff over there, and CIA funded ISIS and all this other stuff. And he's like, yeah, you know. And the funny thing is, you can talk to Mexicans, because I'm a contractor here. You can talk to Mexicans and say, hey, man, you know the CIA funded the Mexican cartel, right? They're like, oh, yeah, we've been trying to tell people for years, and nobody will listen to us. I'm like, yeah. So everybody has a common enemy, and it's basically the government. And you run into it all the time, every day. The only people that really have to ever deal with, you know, any type of legal situation is because they've been affected by it in a negative form. And so that's how a lot of people are having to start getting wide awake about their legal rights. And then once they do, Then they become mad because they realize they've been stomped on by the damn government. And so, you know, they wonder why we're all like, wanting to be patriots and things like that. It's like, well, you know, there's a reason for it. And nobody wants to live under tyranny. And you see the whole globe waking up. And I'm glad to see, you know, people like you, you know, I'm telling people on the streets, you know, do videos, whatever. It's just getting the word and putting it out there and just not stopping, because the mind control of the media has people around here just completely distorted. And when I start pounding them with things, you know, about, you know, 9/11 was an inside job, man, you get some people that are just so brainwashed that... Well, they're not, it's not that they're brainwashed, it's that they're people who don't want to know that something has gone wrong with the country, because then they face that question about what they themselves are willing to do about it. And most people are going to answer that question, I'm not going to do anything, I'm a little tiny coward, I'm going to run off and just hope the tyranny will ignore me, the good German syndrome, which didn't help Germany. But before I let you go, I'd like to point out that at the top of the whatreallyhappened.com main page, I put up a graphic there. And I'm going to leave it there for a while because I think it's hitting an important message. And basically all it says is it's got a bunch of the propaganda posters from Nazi Germany against the Jews. And underneath it just makes a simple observation. Every trick that we are seeing by the United States government and the corporate media to trick us into hating the Muslims is a replay of the same propaganda tricks used by the Nazis to trick the Germans into hating the Jews. And then I end up by saying, fool me once. And I think that's an important idea to get out there, and that's why I'm going to leave that up there. Scott, thank you very much for the inside information. We're going to let you go here and switch over to Bregan in Wisconsin. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Aloha, Michael. I was just wondering if you'd let me do a little shameless plug for 3 of your former guests at an event to try and sync up Michael Rivero and What Really Happened fans in Wisconsin if they're in the area.
Okay, well, go for it.
I'm going to be hosting Gilad Atzmon. He's going to be in Madison on May 17th. May 13th, this coming Wednesday, a week from today. And he will be doing a talk on State Street, and then he'll be coming over to the Weary Traveler, which is a bar and restaurant. And the event can be found at gilad.co.uk. So anyone who's in northern Illinois or anywhere in Wisconsin who wants to meet up with like-minded people and fans of What Really Happened, we'd love to meet you, and I'd love to host you, get to know you, and maybe buy you a few drinks. So that'll be a week from today on the 13th, Wednesday.
All right. Well, listen, I'm going to I've already posted a link to Gilad's schedule around there, and I hope a lot of people show up. Thank you very much, and we're going to switch over here to Damien in New York to take us to the top of the hour. Damien, what is on your mind?
Hi, aloha, Mike. How you doing? Well, I tell you, I wish I had $1 for every time I get to listen to your. Actually, it happens every time I get to listen to your show live. I always get to end up my router. I have to restart my router, sometimes more than once. It's unbelievable. I don't know if there's just a coincidence or what. I don't know. It's kind of weird. But,
I'm sure it's just a coincidence. You know, it's the poor quality of manufacturing and software, blah, blah. I'm sure the NSA isn't going out there trying to wreck our lines of communication. They wouldn't do things like that.
You know, I had sent you an email a couple of days ago. I just wanted to mention it about, I have a couple friends that, and I've done some outreach programs and some tutoring myself. There's some schools, public schools, that are teaching a class entirely on World War II, not just as part of history, but they're actually teaching an entire class on it. And I thought that was rather strange, to devote an entire class to that one specific thing. So I was just wondering what you thought about that specifically. And
now, this is what level of education are we talking about?
This is either the higher level of junior high, like 8th grade, would be considered, I guess, in most schools that's considered junior high, or freshman, sophomore year.
That does sound a little excessive there. I would want to know what their point of view in the class was, what they're teaching, that it was good or bad or indifferent, or how we got into it before I would have an observation on that. But we're certainly seeing a lot of rah-rah for the war going on corporate media, cable TV, a lot of war movies going on, and they're always the movies about how great war is. I haven't seen Full Metal Jacket make the roundup yet, or Platoon, Oliver Stone's film. We're seeing all the movies about the Green Berets with John Wayne and, Battle of the Bulge, and we were heroic, and Bridget Ray Morgan.
I'll try to find out some more about that. The other thing
it could be an effort to simply get the kids into thinking about enlisting in the military, not unlike that classroom depicted at the beginning of All's Quiet on the Western Front.
Yeah. The other thing I'll just say really briefly, I'm just sure you're come up with a break. This sort of mentality of, we've seen it before, but they're really ramping this up. This sort of mentality of trying to find an excuse for people that are doing wrong by making it divert that to the collective. Like, okay, so let's say there's 1% of people that are doing bad, but there's 99% of the people that are doing good. So let's focus on the good people and forget about the bad. Let's not hold them accountable. Let's not call it for what it is. It's kind of like this, we're seeing this with Israel. We see this with so many things. And it's this sort of deviation.
This is a classic propaganda tactic. You find an individual that you get to commit something atrocious, and then you use it to say this is how they all are. Pamela Geller's out there saying, that obviously these two patsies who were gunned down at her little cartoon event, she's trying to imply that every single person of the Muslim persuasion is just like this. We even had a shill caller into the show on Monday screaming about Muhammad was a pedophile, and they're out there trying to sell the hate as hard as they can, and they're not getting a lot of traction.
You know exactly what you're saying. And they're doing the opposite thing as far as Israel. So you have these cases where you see the police brutality and all these things. They're trying to say, well, look at the rest of the Israel people. We all live in happiness and everything else. So don't look at that. So it's almost like they're doing the exact opposite thing. Mm-hmm. As long as it suits their agenda. This is what I'm saying.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Collective blame when collective blame works, and, individual incident when the propaganda is going against you. Anyway, Damien, thank you very much. We're going to let you go here right now because we're coming up on our second news break. Apparently over in San Antonio, a police officer was arrested Tuesday for shoplifting ammunition from a sporting goods store. And he was shopping with his two kids, 1- and 3-year-old. And he bought some stuff that he paid for, but the security cameras showed that he was actually pocketing boxes of ammunition. And he thought he could get away with it because he's a police officer. More about stinky badges when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. Hour number 3. The phone lines are open. 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Tom is still in our control room, still ready to answer the phone when you call on in. All righty, getting on back to the news here. We were talking about stinky badges when we went to the news break here. Now, this happened in Kentucky, in McCracken County. And the story is this detective accidentally shot his own mother at a church wedding. And the story is apparently that he was off duty, did not have a service revolver, but apparently had a small handgun in a leather holster in his jacket pocket, and when he took off the jacket at the church, the gun fell out and fired. Anyway, on a more serious note, there is a case going on right now. It involves an officer, former police officer Lynn Benton, who's accused of killing his wife. It's going to trial. His defense lawyers are asking the judge to bar references to domestic violence in the Benton home leading up to the murder. And apparently Benton, this wasn't an act of rage. Benton conspired with 2 others to murder his wife. And now he's charged with aggravated murder. And his attorneys are actually saying, you shouldn't mention the fact that they were fighting tooth and nail in the week. It might bias the jury against him. Anyway, over in Oxnard, a police officer has gone public with allegations that the Oxnard police have a secret little ritual that they go through. Every time they shoot somebody, they get these little tiny gun and skull tattoos. It's a badge of rank. See all those things. That's a little sick. I'm sure most of us were thinking that police officers really don't want to kill people, that they are traumatized by it. And we know that police departments do make psychiatric help available to police officers involved in shooting with lots and lots of those antidepressants. But there are some people who go into law enforcement who are actually saying, yeah, I knew one personally, former L.A. County Sheriff deputy. And he used to go around saying he lived for the day when he could shoot a black person. Wasn't the word that he used here. Now, there was this former FBI agent accused of violent threats at the CIA. They're going to send him in for psychiatric evaluation because apparently he drove to the gate of the CIA in Langley, Virginia, and started screaming threats at them. So far, so good. Now, Pamela Geller and the media are screaming that we should judge all Muslims by the actions of these two patsies in Garland, Texas. So, following that same logic, we should take the case of this one FBI agent and use it to justify the claim that all FBI agents are nuts. Sauce for the goose and sauce for the gander. You don't get to play it both ways. Now, this one's even a little bit more bizarre. This is out of the Los Angeles Times. An aide to State Attorney General Kamala D. Harris and two others have been accused of operating a rogue private police force that claimed to continue a tradition that existed for more than 3,000 years and has jurisdiction in 33 states and Mexico. Now, these aren't some good old boys out in the middle of the Mojave Desert up on beer. We're talking about somebody inside the California state government who was running this Masonic fraternal police department. And, of course, the aide is now on administrative leave. What is it about police departments and government in general that attracts these deranged people? Speaking of deranged, as you know, Mike Huckabee has come out announcing his candidacy for President of the United States of America, and immediately he has already come under fire because apparently, as part of his fundraising activities, Mike Huckabee rented out his email list of his supporters to a group selling, among other things, hidden cures for cancer embedded in Bible verses. And, of course, all of Huckabee's supporters on that email list are now getting spammed with this kind of nonsense. And Huckabee is defending it, saying, well, it's no different than when CNN has advertisers for catheters or adult diapers, you know. Actually, there is a difference, Mike Huckabee. You are not a news network. So Mike may have already self-destructed before he even gets into the primary season. Now, a former National Security Agency official who's turned whistleblower is basically out there. This is William Binney, who went public about what the NSA was doing long before Edward Snowden did, and I think Binney should have been included in that statue that's been put up of Snowden, Assange, and, the third one that blew the whistle on the U.S. war crimes. It'll come to me. But Binney is out there saying something that we had speculated about a long time ago. The NSA is so overwhelmed with data, it's not effective. It can't find anything in that mess. Because when you add data to a database, it's linearly additive, but the correlation of that data is an unlimited expansion. And the NSA's excuse for spying on all of us is, if you're going to find the needle in the haystack, you've got to have the whole haystack. Well, if you're going to find a needle in the haystack, you don't add hay that you know doesn't have a needle in it. Now, maybe this is true. It certainly makes a lot of sense. With that much data, they can't actually find anything other than they're spying on individuals for blackmail reasons. Or they may be trying to sort of duck the question about why, after all this spying and violations of our Bill of Rights, And the revelation that, yes, our phone conversations are stored as text data by the NSA, why they weren't able to stop the Boston bombing or the Garland, Texas shooting, for those of you who still cling pathetically to the official story about those two events. Because every time there is another one of these events, the first thing you got to ask is, okay, this proves TSA crotch groping, NSA spying, CIA, FBI informants, and none of it works. None of it stopped any of this stuff from working. I mean, in Garland, Texas, the FBI admitted that this guy had been on their radar. The Garland police had a warning 2 days ahead of time. And still, it was allowed to happen. At this point, I think pretty much the entire independent media, with the exception of one or two obviously bought and paid for individuals out there, sees this as another false flag terror attack. This was supposed to be a repeat of Charlie Hebdo here in the American heartland. And the two perpetrators, the two patsies, one of whom was groomed and run by a paid FBI informant since 2007, they didn't get in the front door. So they didn't get all the bloody shirts and bloody bodies that they wanted. It fizzled, basically, what they did. All righty, over in North Dakota, yet another oil train has derailed. 6 cars derailed, huge fire. Nearby town had to be evacuated. Why is this all happening? Well, everybody's screaming, we shouldn't have these oil trains going through our towns. That's only part of the problem. Part of the problem is that the rail system, like our highways, like the aqueducts, like everything else in this country, have been neglected. They're not being maintained properly because all the money collected from the American people has to go to Wall Street and to Israel and to the war machine. And our infrastructure is weak. It is substandard. Bridges are structurally deficient. Dams are structurally deficient. Roads are cracked. Rails starting to rattle a little loose on the tiles, which is what leads to a derailment. When the rail pops off the tie, spreads out just a little tiny bit. That's what's going on. All right, we're going to take a break for commercials. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. And we were talking earlier about the Gulf oil disaster and how the official U.S. government proclamation is that the problem is over, the oil magically vanished and went away, and the seafood in the Gulf is safe to eat. Well, down in Mexico, they're not buying that. And 25,000 Mexican fishermen are suing British Petroleum for the environmental damage caused by the Deepwater Horizon disaster, citing that it has cost them millions of dollars, or pesos, losses to their businesses, and an ecological damage to the entire Gulf system. Which, yeah, you think, because, as it turns out, all of those highly toxic oil dispersants, like Corexit, they don't make the oil magically go away. Doesn't decompose, doesn't biodegrade. All it does is it causes the oil to sort of tighten up the molecules to increase its density to where it's more dense than water, and it sinks down to the bottom of the ocean, under the theory that if you don't see there's a problem, there is no problem. And there is a problem. I mean, the Gulf seafood industry has been hammered. The only thing that saved them is the Pentagon now buys Gulf seafood from those businesses to feed to our soldiers over in the war zones, figuring that, heck, most of them are going to get shot anyway, so it doesn't matter if it's causing damage. Now, as you know, we've got a bird flu outbreak hitting America's heartland. It is spreading very rapidly. Could just be a natural occurrence, evolution of a new strain. Could be somebody's idea of industrial sabotage. That is a reality. The U.S. certainly did it to a lot of other countries, and maybe somebody decided payback. It was time for payback. But they're already talking about the fact that this coming Thanksgiving may be a turkeyless Thanksgiving. Going to have something else. Some turkey-like ground-up substance coming from the large food corporations here. The Hormel Company is already starting to cut jobs because of the shortage of birds coming in to their processing plant. And it is a major, major problem out there. Now then, up in Vermont, the judge in the GMO labeling law case is upholding the GMO labeling law. It's a far cry from what we saw down here in Maui. Basically, the voters of Vermont lobbied and got a law passed by the Vermont legislature signed by the governor mandating labeling of all foods containing GMO content. Needless to say, the GMO industry sued, looking for an injunction against the legislation because corporations obviously have more rights than the voters do. And the suit is going through the court right now. And the lawyers for the GMO corporations asked the judge to basically issue an injunction banning the law on GMO labeling while the case was going through the court, at which point the lawyers would simply drag it out for years and years and years and years, and the people of Vermont would not know what it is they're putting into their mouths. The judge turned that request down. The mandated GMO labeling will continue in Vermont while the case moves forward. Now, as you know, we're going through a big stink down in Maui, where the Maui voters voted overwhelmingly to ban all GMO experimental crops on their island. We're not talking about a GMO product that's been approved for human consumption. These are the experimental ones, and they'd like to grow them out here in Hawaii because if they make a mistake, they figure it'll be confined to Hawaii. We know that's nonsense. When the first humans arrived in Hawaii, it was already filled with plants and birds, which managed to get here from the continental masses. And in the case of Maui, they were able to find a judge to simply put a hold on the bill and say, we don't care if the voters wanted it, it's not going to be put into effect until we let the legislature and everybody else play with it for 2 or 3 years. Meanwhile, these experimental, potentially dangerous GMO crops are continuing on Maui. We also have them here on Oahu, up on the North Shore area, all kinds of little plots with barbed wire fences around them and saying, keep out, these weeds might eat you, or something like that. Now, there was a issue some time ago, this is being reported down in Natural Society, where there was a lawsuit involving a farmer that was caught apparently intentionally contaminating organic farms with GMOs. And apparently Monsanto was very secretly contributing huge money to the defense of this Australian farmer whose GMO canola crop infected Steve Marsh's organic fields. Now, the Supreme Court of Western Australia, had no sympathy for Steve Marsh's plight and sided in favor of Baxter and Monsanto. And we've seen that in a lot of places, including here in the U.S. and up in Canada, where if you are growing organic natural crops and your field is contaminated by GMO pollen blown into your fields by the wind or carried by the birds and the bees, the courts side with Monsanto that you are illegally using their intellectual property. Well, where's the intention to steal it? They should be handling this as what it is, an industrial accident, where their products are going to places they're not wanted. But unfortunately, when you live under a fascist economic dictatorship, the courts are on the side of the corporations, no matter how silly they look. Article out of here, the Daily Bell, does GMO food cause stomach inflammation? This is another animal experiment that's been conducted. They took a bunch of newborn pigs, divided them into 2 groups. One was fed natural organic crops, the other the GMO. When it was time for the pigs to be harvested for their meat, they took the innards that would normally be thrown away and sent them to veterinarians for autopsies. And they found in the pigs fed on the GMO crops severe stomach inflammation in 22% of the male pigs and 41% of the female pigs on the GMO diets. The pigs fed on the natural diet was 5.6 in the male and 18.9 of the female. So there is definitely more laboratory evidence that these genes are causing problems. Now, according to Dr. Anthony Samsel, glyphosate causes humans who ingest it to gain weight. It's another one of these chemicals that is behind the so-called obesity epidemic afflicting Americans, along with chemicals in the food that make you want to eat more, like aspartame and monosodium glutamate, and unmetabolized growth hormones that you're getting in beef and chicken products that cause your body to balloon up the same way the farm animals did. And they're not going to take the additives out of the food. They'll just sell you exercise machines and exercise programs and all this other stuff. It's another market opportunity out there. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here. Now, speaking of GMO, there is surprising news coming out of Afghanistan's opium farms that this year they are starting to plant the poppies with a brand new type of poppy seed that will double the amount of opium-bearing resin. Huzzah, huzzah, huzzah. So where do you think these seeds came from? That's a question that nobody seems to answer. Just all of a sudden the opium growers have got these new seeds that will double the opium output. Are they Roundup-ready seeds? Did somebody take their GMO technology and apply it to the drug trade? Probably. The drug criminals have been able to hire the very best scientists to try and improve their products. I remember when I was a kid, back during the last great ice age, if you bought that evil marijuana, it usually came with a whole bunch of seeds in there, which you had to take out, otherwise they'd explode when you tried to smoke the evil weed. But you could take those seeds and plant them in your back window box. No more. The Pakalolo is now seedless. Somebody went to the process of figuring out a way to grow marijuana that doesn't have seeds, because they don't want you planting your own. Cuts into the profitability. I remember back in the 1990s in Los Angeles, there was a spate of what were called the designer drugs, where scientists were creating variations on illegal drugs that were just different enough where they were, at least briefly, legal. And they made some mistakes, and a lot of people got harmed by these things. There was a synthetic version of the China white opium, which actually turned out to be an isomer of what's called fentanyl. And it actually permanently caused Parkinson-like symptoms in the kids who were using it. So you've got to watch out for that stuff. But again, it underscores the fact that the drug cartels, which includes the CIA, have access to the very best scientists to come up with things like this. Anyway, we have been looking at the Michelle Obama school lunches and how terrible they are, but they're being served because they meet the federal guidelines. Now, we know from the compact fluorescent issue that the federal government guidelines are very often crafted to essentially mandate the purchase of one particular company's products. Now, under the guise of energy conservation, laws were passed that basically outlawed Edison-style tungsten light bulbs as being very wasteful. And the only lamp that you could get that met the guidelines were then the compact fluorescents. Now the LEDs have come on, which are clearly a superior product. But it turned out that General Electric had basically had a lot of input on that legislation so that it would be written so that their product was the only possible option for consumers to buy. So thinking about that, we have this very interesting article where Flamin' Hot Cheetos have been declared healthy meals, according to the Obama administration. Because the way the health guidelines for human consumption and the school lunch program are written, Cheetos was able to slip in under the wire. They did make a couple of changes to their formula, so it now qualifies. Flamin' Hot Cheetos qualifies as a nutritious snack under the Obama administration. Let's see, what's in Cheetos? Well, let's see, salt, lactic acid, citric acid, cheddar cheese, sour cream, now no problem so far, partially hydrogenated soybean oil, artificial flavor, artificial colors, vegetable oil from GMO corn or soy, maltodextrin from GMO corn, monosodium glutamate, is considered a healthy snack. No, it isn't for people like me who get a migraine from it. Disodium phosphate, enriched cornmeal, again from GMO. Meanwhile, the FDA sent a warning letter to the snack bar company Kind, which makes snack bars out of nuts, grains, coconut, and seeds. And the FDA slapped him down saying, you may not call your product healthy because it doesn't meet the guidelines that we have put out there to support our friends over in these snack food corporations. Panera, we talked about them the other day. Panera is now getting on board this new consumer demand for healthy eating, which has been declared a mental illness by the American Psychiatric Association. I kid you not. Orthorexia nervosa. If you want to eat healthy, natural, organic food, you are suffering a mental illness, and we have a pill to sell you that will make you love your meat-like substance in a bun you're getting from the large corporations here. But Panera's owners basically take the attitude they design their food as if their own families are going to eat it, which I think is a really good idea. And remember, Monsanto's own company Cafeteria will not serve GMO. So they're dropping about 150 ingredients from its menu. They expect it to be completed sometime next year. But there is a huge consumer demand for organic, natural food, to where farmers are starting to basically burn their GMO fields to kill off the pollen so they can go back to organic, natural foods. We had Chipotle is going all non-GMO. Now Panera, the tide is turning against the Frankenfoods, which is why the GMO companies are trying to find some way they can make it illegal to label the food as being GMO or non-GMO. That's the other side of the coin. They don't even want a label saying GMO-free to be legal in this country. You will eat your GMO stuff and you will like it, because that's what makes America great. And by the way, my wife and I used to be big customers of the Safeway markets. We're going to have to go to another market, either Times or Foodland, because we used to be able to go in there and get USDA certified organic food, which doesn't mean it's totally GMO free, just that the GMO is a little bit lower. And as of our last visit, the brands that we used to buy that were organic, natural, certified organic, they're all gone. And in their place is Safeway's new proprietary line of the same products, all of which are just loaded with chemicals that we can't eat, like MSG and aspartame and the rest of it. So we're going to have to change markets. And you need to be willing to do that, too. A lot of people get into a habit, oh, this is our market, we always go there. If you really want to be in control of your diet, you have to be willing to say, I'm going to go another extra 2 blocks to this other market. Because we did go into Times Market, and we found our favorite brands of certified organic products there. So they're our new favorite market over there. Meanwhile, the Food and Drug Administration has decided the time has come to crack down on what are called artisan soap makers, because the FDA cannot guarantee the health and safety of soap that's made in little workshops, as opposed to these commercially produced soaps that are loaded with all kinds of chemicals you really need to be avoiding. But the FDA isn't here to actually protect your health and safety. They're here to basically coerce customers to be dependent on these large corporations and their products, which is why the FDA will come out and say that Flamin' Hot Cheetos are healthy and Kind snack bars are not. Because it's all driven by the money and greed. Our society really is totally, totally corrupt. Apparently, the United States is now considered the worst place to be a mother among the developed nations. The United States ranks 61st globally in maternal health. 61st. We have the most expensive medical care on the planet, and it is of poor, poor quality. Why? Well, because it's all about the money. It's not about health care. They don't even want you to get well. If you're healthy and well, they can't make money off of you. All right, we're coming up on a commercial break. When we come back, some new developments in the world of vaccines and the harm that they cause. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to our show. Last segment of the program today. And before I get into the vaccine stuff here, story that just came across my desk. Apparently, Secretary of State John Kerry has sent a written warning to the European Union that if they do not continue to go along with U.S. sanctions against Russia, they will be made to pay. In other words, the U.S. has reached the point of having to threaten the European Union to go along with the Russian sanctions. Now, a lot of those countries in Europe, they have suffered tremendously because of the sanctions, certainly far more than Russia has. And a lot of those countries are starting to say, this is nonsense. This is not our fight between the U.S. and Russia. We want to do business. And so now we've reached the point where the United States of America is threatening Europe not to do business with Russia, just like they're threatening India not to do business with Iran. This is geopolitical thuggism. Do what we say or we will do bad things to you. Because after all, look at what the U.S. did to Iraq, Syria, Libya, Yemen, all those other places. So America's geopolitical tyranny is now on full display for the world to see. I don't think the Europeans are going to react well to this. I certainly wouldn't. Neither would you. All righty, getting on to vaccinations. We're seeing a lot more articles going on about how these outbreaks of illnesses like whooping cough seem to be hitting primarily the people who got the vaccines. And we're actually hearing, I'm not kidding you, this is an article that we saw over in Natural Blaze. Whooping cough invades the vaccinated, where Big Pharma is now coming out here saying that the whooping cough virus is outsmarting their vaccine. That's the explanation for it. No, that really doesn't work. When the primary people coming down with these illnesses, whooping cough or measles, are the ones who are vaccinated, the vaccine is causing the disease. Now, back in 2006, Federal Health Minister Tony Abbott said that he would not be rushing to have his own daughters vaccinated against cervical cancer because of the horrible side effects that were hitting so many of the women. Well, today, Prime Minister Tony Abbott is out there saying we have a no jab, no play. You will get your jab or you will be cut off from all financial assistance. And under their system, pretty much every family gets some kind of government assistance. So Tony Abbott flip-flopped on that. A lot of people are complaining about how Elmo from Sesame Street is now being used to propagandize children about, oh, yes, you want to get your shot? You absolutely do. Now, not too long ago, there was a huge scandal where a scientist with the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention wrote something called the Denmark Study that ostensibly disproved any link between vaccines and autism, as well as other neurological disorders that seem to accompany the use of the vaccines. Well, the article has been discredited, and now the scientist himself, Dr. Paul Thorson, is on the run from authorities. He was indicted by a federal grand jury in Atlanta because apparently he got a huge amount of money to fund his study, but the study was just made up to please Big Pharma, and he just put the money in his pocket. And we're talking $2 million that he got to prove there was no link between vaccines and autism, and he couldn't prove it, obviously. He just wrote a report that said, yes, I have proven there's no link, and he put the money in his pocket, and now he's on the run here. It is another reminder that while scientific method is a valuable tool for determining the truth, individual scientists are just as corruptible as individual politicians or individual clergy. Another story coming out of Investment Watch blog. This one's probably going to really wake up people of my age. There are now 60 lab studies that show a link between the polio vaccine we had as children and cancer. One of these vaccines that went out there was known to be contaminated with a cancer-causing gene. But that's okay. If you get cancer, we've got the cancer treatment centers of Poughkeepsie, and they'll care for you, as long as you live or until you run out of money, whichever will happen first. And finally, I want to talk about this story, the scandal that came out of the New England Compounding Pharmacy, NECC. And it was a huge scandal. It didn't get the coverage it deserved. NECC is a compounding pharmacy which means they are licensed and regulated only to make up medications to fill individual prescriptions. They aren't allowed to manufacture in bulk and market drugs in batches to clinics and doctors. That's what they were doing. They were operating as if they were a manufacturer while being regulated only as a pharmacy. And it all came apart when some of their products contaminated with meningitis killed patients in 20 states. And they went in there and finally took a look at this. Our government regulators, the place was just absolutely filthy. They'd obviously tried to clean it up, but it wasn't being kept in the sterile condition that pharmaceutical manufacturers are required to have. Now, NECC filed for bankruptcy in December of 2012. And now, of course, they're facing criminal prosecution. The problem I have with this is that our government has gotten into the habit of portraying itself as a fireman. The house is already on fire. We will come in, throw water all over everything, chop holes in the wall with axes. We'll give you back half of what you had before, and you should think of us as heroes. Which is okay for a firefighter, but the government's job is to be the one that comes in 2 weeks before the fire and says, tape up that ragged wiring or clean up those oily rags. The government is supposed to be preventing these things from happening in the first place, not showing up after the disaster is over and acting like they're relevant to what's going on. That's the difference between good government and corrupt government. Now, apparently, researchers in Iran have announced they've come up with a cancer nanodrug that is proving very effective as well. I'm sure it will not be allowed in the United States. There's a lot of drugs in other countries that are effective against cancer, but they're not approved for use in the United States of America because American pharmaceutical companies don't own them or license them and have their own products that they want to force you to buy. Hydrazine sulfate is used all over Europe and Russia to mitigate cancer symptoms. It's not a cancer cure. It's never been touted as one, but it can reduce cancer symptoms to survivable limits. Remember, 25% of all cancers will spontaneously heal themselves. But the attitude of the oncologists in this country is because we don't know which 25% will spontaneously cure, we just treat everything. Senators are now calling for a massive probe of 56 Veterans Administration medical centers across the country over mismanagement. Another story coming out of the New Yorker, overkill, talking about the fact that one of the reasons medical care is so expensive in this country is unnecessary medical care that is being prescribed for patients to basically run up the bill. And I actually witnessed this firsthand myself many, many years ago before I met the lovely Lady Claire. I was dating a staffer at local hospital in West Covina, and they were one of the first in the area to get a CAT scan machine. And while I was waiting for my date at her office, I saw the memo on the wall. Always send people to the CAT scan. It has to be kept busy 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in order to make the payments on the machine. Nothing about whether the patients actually needed the CAT scan, just the necessity to run people through there to pay the bills. It's all driven by money. The entire system is corrupt from top to bottom, including the government that is supposed to be maintaining the oversight. Instead, we have Obamacare. All right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get some animation work done. Work on the new website, the new version of whatreallyhappened.com. I'm finally making progress on that. We will be back tomorrow here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay well, stay informed, stay skeptical. Go ahead and get angry. You deserve it. Please call your local talk radio stations and ask them to consider carrying the programming from Genesis Communication. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.